What began as a simple family move in Pennsylvania soon turned into years of pain, fear, and terror because their new home hated them. It scratched, pushed, and tormented. It whispered in the dark, called their names, and left marks on their skin. It wasn't just haunted, it was alive. For 15 years, the Smurl family fought to survive inside a house that seemed determined to destroy them. This is a true story, documented by the church, investigated by journalists, and witnessed by those who dared to enter. Sometimes, evil doesn't come into your home. Sometimes, it is your home. Before we descend into the story, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps me uncover more places where the past still lingers in the dark. Now, let's return to the story. In August 1974, the Smurl family moved to West Pittston, a small, quiet town in Pennsylvania. Their new home was a modest duplex, a 2-story house divided in half. One side for Jack and Janet with their 4 daughters, the other for Jack's parents, Mary and John. The house was old, its walls thin, its air faintly carrying the scent of dust and time, but it felt warm, safe, the kind of place where a family could finally start over. They painted the walls, replaced the worn furniture, and cleaned years of neglect from the basement. It was ordinary, almost too ordinary. The first few days were peaceful. The children ran in the yard, Jack fixed the fence, Janet washed the windows. Everything looked normal. Yet in that calm, something unseen was already watching. One evening, while the family ate dinner, the lamp above the table began to sway, slowly, rhythmically. They blamed a draft, but the windows were shut. The next morning, Janet heard water running in the bathroom. When she opened the door, the faucet was on full. No one had touched it. Jack checked the pipes. Nothing was wrong. They tried to ignore it, but then it happened again and again. Doors slammed on their own. The television flickered to life in the middle of the night. And slowly, the house began to feel occupied. Janet was the first to sense it. She spoke of a strange odor, a mix of sulfur and rotting flesh, that drifted through the rooms. Sometimes she felt someone standing directly behind her, close enough to breathe on her neck. But when she turned, nothing. Jack dismissed it as exhaustion, the move, the work, the noise of 4 children. But at night, when he woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway, the slow groan of the floorboards drawing closer to their bedroom door, even he began to wonder. The house seemed to absorb every whisper, every breath, as if it were listening, waiting. In those first weeks, the Smurls didn't yet know. They weren't the only ones living there. Months passed after the move, and what began as harmless oddities slowly turned into something darker. It started quietly, a whisper that didn't dare to speak. But with every week, that whisper grew bolder. By mid-autumn, Janet began noticing things disappearing. At first, small items. A set of keys, a hairbrush, a kitchen towel. She would find them in impossible places, inside closets, under beds, even in the freezer. Sometimes they would simply appear back where she'd already searched, neatly placed, as if someone wanted her to notice. At night, the house seemed to breathe. The walls gave off a faint vibration. Doors creaked without wind. And the silence felt too heavy, too deliberate, as if the building itself was listening. From the basement came a low hum, soft but constant, seeping into the rooms above. One evening, Jack heard a loud thud from the girls' room. When he rushed in, all 4 children were asleep, But the dresser had been moved nearly 2 feet across the floor. There were no marks, no explanation. Janet's sense of being watched grew unbearable. She avoided being alone in the house, but the more she feared it, the more it made itself known. She would later recall waking early one morning and stepping into the kitchen only to be met by an overwhelming stench, the smell of rotting meat. When she opened the refrigerator, it was empty. Then just as suddenly, the odor vanished. Jack searched for logic. He checked the wiring, the vents, the plumbing. Everything was fine. But reason evaporated the moment the television turned on by itself at night, glowing with static. Another morning, Janet glanced in the bathroom mirror and saw a brief shadow move behind her. She turned. Nothing. Only the mirror, trembling ever so slightly, as if still holding its breath. The Smurls were beginning to understand that their new home wasn't just old or creaky. Something else lived there, and it was only beginning to wake. By early 1975, the house had stopped pretending to be quiet. What once felt like coincidence was now a pattern, deliberate, growing stronger each day. One evening, Jack went down to the basement to turn off the light. The air there felt thick, heavy, colder than it should have been. As he reached for the switch, he heard it, a whisper, soft but unmistakable, calling his name from somewhere behind him. When he turned, nothing moved. But the darkness felt alive, pulsing, as if it were breathing. At night, moans began to echo from the children's room. Janet would check. The girls slept peacefully. But from beneath the floor came a dragging sound, slow and wet, like something heavy being pulled across the ground. By morning, furniture had shifted, and a dark smear marked the wall beside one of the beds. It wouldn't wash off. The light in the hallway began to flicker constantly, even after Jack replaced the bulbs. One night, as he looked up to inspect the fixture, it fell, shattering at his feet. When he bent down to pick up the glass, a faint laugh drifted up from below the floorboards. Janet grew afraid of her own reflection. She started noticing that her image in the mirror didn't always move with her. A subtle delay, a fraction of a second, but long enough to feel wrong. She stopped looking directly into mirrors after that. Then came March. Jack was sleeping when something invisible lifted him from the bed and slammed him onto the floor. Deep scratches marked his chest. Janet swore she saw it. A black, shapeless mass hovering above him before it retreated into the wall. The children began waking up in tears, saying someone walked between their beds at night. One of them cried after feeling a cold hand tug at their blanket. What had once been their home was now a cage. Every sound, every shadow carried a presence that no longer hid itself. The house was awake, and it wanted to play. When people begin to suspect that something unexplainable lives inside their home, they look for reasons. The Smurls did the same. They searched for logic, for patterns, anything that could make sense of what was happening. But the more they searched, the less sense it made. By the spring of 1975, every day in the house began with dread. They never knew when it would happen, morning, noon, or deep in the night, but something always did. Faucets turned on by themselves, objects fell from tables, mirrors cracked without being touched. One morning, Janet heard a dull thump inside a wall that led to nowhere, just plaster and outer brick. She pressed her ear against it and froze. There was breathing on the other side, slow, deep, human. A few days later, 4 long scratches appeared in the same spot on the wallpaper, as if something had tried to claw its way out. Jack turned to the local priest for help. The man listened carefully, but simply advised them to pray and not to panic. The family did, but after their first prayer together, things got worse. During dinner, dishes fell from the shelves, and a moaning sound rolled through the ceiling, low, guttural, almost like a growl. The children screamed. From that night on, the house was never silent again. Sometimes the walls trembled, faintly, as if something moved inside them. Growls echoed from the basement. By dawn, the smell of sulfur seeped through the cracks beneath the doors. Jack began hearing voices. They weren't whispers anymore. They spoke clearly, in tones that dripped with anger. They called his name, over and over. Sometimes, they repeated the same words until he left the room. When he told Janet, she didn't answer. Because she had already been hearing them too. Sleep became rare. Speech turned quiet. The family learned to fear silence, because silence meant it was listening. Something behind those walls was alive, and its hatred had a shape. By the summer of 1986, after nearly a decade of fear, the Smurl family reached their breaking point. They turned to the only people left who might understand what was happening: Ed and Lorraine Warren. The Warrens were no strangers to darkness. Ed, a former Navy veteran turned demonologist, and Lorraine, a clairvoyant who claimed to see what others could only feel, had investigated some of the most disturbing hauntings in America. When they heard of the Smurl case through a local priest, they agreed to visit the house in West Pittston. Their first visit began quietly. They spoke with the family for hours, gathering details, searching for a rational explanation. But by sunset, it was clear there wasn't one. Lorraine described the air suddenly dropping in temperature, a chill that seemed to move with her through the room. She said she saw it then, a black, pulsing mass near the ceiling. Not a shadow, not a figure, just hatred, alive and breathing. Moments later, the lamp above her flickered violently and went dark. The Warrens set up audio recorders throughout the house, leaving them to run overnight. When they reviewed the tapes, what they heard defied explanation: growls, moans, heavy breathing, thuds against the walls, and on one tape, a deep male voice whispering a single word: Jack. Ed concluded that there were multiple entities inside the house, at least 4 spirits, with one dominant presence controlling the rest. He described it as a parasite feeding on fear. The more terrified the family became, the stronger it grew. They advised the Smurls to pray daily, to avoid confrontation, to never speak to whatever was in the house. But after the Warrens left, the activity didn't stop. It escalated. One evening, a dark shadow crept across the children's bedroom ceiling, circling above their beds. Later that night, black marks appeared on the ceiling, shaped like burned handprints. For the Smurls, this was no longer about survival. It had become a war, and their home was the battlefield. After the Warrens' investigation, the Smurl haunting became a matter of public record. Local newspapers ran stories, and reporters began showing up outside the house. Some saw the family as delusional. Others believed them, victims of something beyond human understanding. But soon, the case drew the attention of the church. Representatives from the Diocese of Scranton were sent to conduct an official inquiry. After several visits and reports, the decision was made. An exorcism would be performed. The name of the priest involved was never released. The ritual took place early in the morning. Every window and door was sealed shut. The priest set out a crucifix, candles, and a vial of holy water. The Smurl stood silently at the base of the stairs as he began. As the first prayers echoed through the house, the air dropped in temperature. A soft, cracking sound came from within the walls, like the house itself exhaling. Then a heavy crash upstairs. The candles flickered, then went out one by one. From the basement came a deep growl, low and guttural, almost animal-like. Janet covered her ears as the children began to cry. The priest continued his prayers, voice steady, even as the chandelier in the living room fell to the floor, shattering at his feet. When the holy water hit the ground, it hissed. For hours, the ritual continued without pause. When it was finally over, silence filled the house. The air grew lighter. The sulfur smell was gone. The Smurls felt, for the first time in years, that they could breathe. In the weeks that followed, things were quiet. The children slept peacefully. The furniture stayed still. Mirrors no longer trembled. For the first time in over a decade, the house was calm. But Janet would later admit that sometimes, late at night, she still woke to a faint crackling sound behind the walls. Soft, distant, but familiar. The church declared the case resolved, saying the activity had significantly decreased. Officially, the exorcism was a success. But for the Smurls, it didn't feel like an ending. Evil, they learned, never truly leaves. It only waits. After the exorcism, the Smurls hoped the nightmare was finally over. And for a while, the house was quiet. But silence didn't bring peace. It brought attention. Their story spread quickly. Newspapers, radio shows, television interviews. West Pittston became a small-town curiosity, a place where strangers arrived just to stand outside the haunted house. Reporters camped outside, neighbors whispered, and strangers knocked on the door. Some believed them. Others called them liars. To some, they were victims of something beyond understanding. To others, they were a family seeking fame. Even among their neighbors, the Smurls became divided figures, pitied by a few, mocked by many. They tried to return to normal life, but the past clung to them like dust that wouldn't wash away. In 1988, journalist Robert Curran released The Haunted, written with Ed and Lorraine Warren. The book chronicled every detail. From the first disturbances to the final exorcism, it caused an uproar. Believers saw it as proof that evil walks among us. Skeptics dismissed it as hysteria, a story built from stress and suggestion. A year later, CBS aired a made-for-television film based on the book. Jack and Janet agreed to cooperate, hoping it would finally set the record straight. Instead, the debate only grew louder. Scientists blamed electromagnetic fields. Psychologists spoke of shared delusion. Priests called it psychological oppression. But the Smurls knew what they had lived through. They had seen it, heard it, felt it. And even though the rituals had quieted the house, something inside them still listened for the next sound in the dark. A few years later, they moved away. The new owners claimed the house was calm, unremarkable. But on windy nights, when the walls creaked and the air turned cold, a faint crackling could still be heard within. Most called it settling wood. The Smurls would have called it something else. Because some houses never stopped speaking. Years passed. The Smurl family tried to move on, but the past never truly left them. The house in West Pittston was behind them, yet not gone. Janet admitted that sometimes she still woke in the middle of the night, certain she could hear that same faint knocking inside the walls. Jack grew quiet, distant. The children, now grown, all carried the same shadow, a memory of dark hallways and the feeling of being watched by something that was never really gone. When asked by reporters if she regretted sharing their story, Janet would always say no. If it warns someone else, she said, then it was worth it. She believed the house had only been a vessel, a place where evil found a crack in the fabric of the world. Oh, Ed and Lorraine Warren often spoke of the Smurl case as one of the most dangerous of their careers. They believed the entity never fully left, only weakened, waiting, patient, feeding on the quiet. The book, the film, the news stories, they made the haunting famous. But as years passed, the world moved on. The house became just another aging home on a quiet Pennsylvania street. Tourists stopped visiting. New owners moved in. They lived without fear, perhaps unaware that within those walls once lived something no one could explain. Still, there's something strange about old houses. Sometimes, at dusk, when the light fades and the glass turns gold, the reflection shifts, just slightly, as if something moves inside. And if you listen carefully, you might hear a breath that doesn't belong to anyone. Maybe it's just the wind, or maybe some stories never really end. They simply fall silent until someone new comes home. This is the story of the Smurl family, a family that faced the darkest corners of fear, and of a house that taught us one truth. Sometimes, evil doesn't come from outside. Sometimes, it's already waiting for you behind the door.